I think that most of you know that I live in downtown Toronto, on Carlton Street, right across from the famous Maple Leaf Gardens, or should I say the now famous Loblaws. And just about 5 minutes east of me on Carlton Street, there's a small street called Mutual Street. And it's a small 3 or 4 block, mainly residential street that used to be the home of the Mutual Street Arena, long since torn down, but still remembered as the birthplace in 1925 of the United Church of Canada. The United Church of Canada was born 98 years ago, yesterday, in the midst of great controversy. There are still many people who have heard stories of congregations and communities and even families that were torn apart over the decision to enter into church union. When the dust settled, all of the Methodist churches in Canada, all of the congregational churches, and about 70% of the Presbyterian churches came into church union. And the scriptural mandate for that union was from the Gospel of John that Liz read for us this morning, Jesus' prayer that all may be one. When the United Church of Canada came into being in 1925, the basis of union was the constitutionally accepted set of beliefs of this brand new denomination. And the basis of union has been called a document of pragmatic compromise. The very Reverend George Pidgeon, who was the first moderator of the United Church, said of the basis of union, "This is not all we believe. These are the truths on which we can agree." And so there was a sense of genuine humility, I think, on the part of the founders of our church. They didn't pretend to know it all or to have all the answers. The founders of our church believed that this statement of faith, the basis of union, which they had crafted together in the midst of much controversy and compromise, had to be rewritten in each new generation. And it has been. There was a new statement of faith just 15 years after church union in 1940. There was the new creed in 1968 and the Song of Faith in 2006. As Michael Blair told you on the first Sunday of February when he preached here, I love the United Church, almost as if I'd chosen it. But of course, I didn't. I was born into the church 26 years after church union. But having been born into this church, nurtured in this church, and grown and changed with the church, I can't imagine belonging to any other. We've had some challenging times in the United Church in the last 25 or 30 years. But my hope is that these experiences have made us stronger in a way, not bigger, but stronger, and more certain of who we are in the long run. I think we finally realized that we're different from other churches, and it's a difference of which we should be proud. I also think that we've learned that there's a price to pay for being faithful to what we believe is just and right. Like a lot of other people, I used to think that the fact that we have so many different denominations in the Christian church, that was a weakness of some kind, that there was something wrong with that. But I don't feel that way anymore. I think that it's important for us to cooperate as much as possible with churches of other denominations, and for us to do together all that we can do together and do separately only what we must. But I've also come to believe that there's something unique about the United Church, that the United Church has something to offer to our Canadian society that other churches can't. Now, we all know that people criticize the United Church because they think that we don't know what we believe, or that we're just so wishy-washy that we'll believe anything. And it's true that the United Church is not a terribly doctrinal church. We don't usually go around saying, this is the truth and this is what you must believe, or you're on the wrong track. People in the United Church are more likely to be explorers, questioners, maybe even doubters, who see their faith not so much as a destination, but as a pilgrimage or a journey. It was the late Northrop Frye who once said, "The United Church of Canada is not agnostic. It simply refuses to claim full knowledge of truths that are ultimately beyond human understanding." In the United Church, at least at our best, we encourage people to think for themselves, to ask their own questions, to express their own doubts, and to honor the experiences of other people whose beliefs are different from ours. To be specific, I'd like to suggest 3 things about the United Church that I think we need to be proud of and to celebrate on this, our 98th anniversary. I love the United Church, first of all, because it's a church that tries to be, and at its best is, open and inclusive. A community where everybody, however different, is valued and appreciated and respected. On our 10th anniversary as a denomination, way back in 1935, in a statement reaffirmed in 1950 and included ever since in the manual, we renewed our commitment to what we then called an inclusive Christian fellowship. Ever since those 3 distinct traditions, Methodist and Presbyterian and Congregational, negotiated and compromised and came together in 1925 to form one church, we've been suspicious of any person or any school of thought that claims to have the only way. The United Church of Canada was the first church anywhere in the world to have a national staff person for interfaith relations, acknowledging that our task is not to convert people of other faiths to Christianity, but rather to listen to people of other faiths, to learn new truths from them. Christianity, we believe, is one way to God, but not the only way. You might be surprised to hear me say that I believe that inclusiveness has limits and has to be negotiated. Because you see, I don't think there's a place in the church for racism. There's not a place in the church for sexism or for homophobia. Being inclusive is hard. Figuring out what inclusiveness even means and what its limits are is a challenge. But it is nevertheless a hallmark of what we try to be in the United Church. I also love the United Church because of its consistent social witness. We believe that God calls us to bring every part of our lives, to be in the world as people of faith, seeking justice in every aspect of life. It was the prophet Micah, and I often suggest that this is the motto of the United Church of Canada. Micah asked the question, "Will I bow myself before God? Will I come with burnt offerings and sacrifices? Is that what's required of me? And then he answers his own question. He says, no, this is not what God requires of me. What God requires is that we do justice, that we love kindness, and that we walk humbly with God. Seeking justice is something for which the United Church is known throughout the world. And our quest for justice has often embroiled us in conflict and controversy. But, according to the prophet Micah at least, that's exactly where God wants us to be. The United Church came into existence in 1925 in a whirl of controversy. A vision of unity, a dream of a united Protestant church was welcomed by many, but it was also threatening to others. The fact that churches and communities and even families were divided is an indication of just how seriously people took the whole issue of church union. Not too much later, in 1936, the first woman, Lydia Grucci, was ordained in the United Church, but only after years of struggle and pain. It took other churches many more years before they ordained women, and of course, we all know that some denominations still don't recognize the gifts and the calling of women to ministry. And then in the early 60s, and this is something I actually remember, there was a terrible uproar over what was then called the new curriculum for Sunday schools. And there was a terrible uproar because this new curriculum promoted reading the Bible in its historical and cultural context, rather than in a literal way. Once again, other churches condemned the United Church, and there were critics from within the church as well. But by 1964, 90% of United Church congregations were using this controversial new curriculum. Our church has struggled in its 98-year history with divorce and remarriage, capital punishment, abortion, racism, and the environment. In 1988, of course, when I was here as your minister, the church struggled to come to an inclusive understanding of ordination, agreeing that sexual orientation should not be a barrier to ordination. And that debate on ordination led to a study on the authority and interpretation of Scripture, which concluded that in the United Church, we believe that the Bible is one foundational authority, but not the only foundational authority for our faith. In so many cases, the United Church has led the way and paid the price in controversy and conflict for what other churches would years later accept as normal and right. In the 1980s, when the United Church was knee-deep in the controversy about the ordination of LGBT folks, other denominations, in case you didn't notice this, ducked for cover and happily welcomed the disgruntled United Church people who left our denomination, including this congregation. And now, 35 years later, most of those other denominations, at least the mainline ones, also ordain LGBT ministers. But we paved the way, and we paid the price. I may be still a little bitter about that. So in the United Church, at least for the most part, we've learned to agree to disagree with each other. Excuse me. See if that works. Respecting one another's rights to differ, preserving the health of the community, and letting God be the final judge. Such trust is necessary in order to have creative dialogue and decision-making. And finally, the third thing I love about the United Church is that it's a church that encourages asking questions and exploring faith rather than simply pledging allegiance to a creed or a doctrine. Someone has put it this way, and I always find these kind of images to be helpful. Some churches build corrals with fences, and they herd their people into corrals and tell them what they must believe in order to be welcome in that corral. And if you don't believe, then you're out of the corral, you're out of the fold, so to speak. Other churches, like the United Church, handle it differently. Rather than building a corral with fences, we drive a post into the middle of the field. We attach our articles of faith, our beliefs, if you like, to the post. And then we invite people to get as close to the post as possible. But of course, in the United Church, we would probably disagree on what should be on the post. I've had the honor of providing leadership to United Church congregations all over this country in the 47 years since I was ordained. Student charge in New Brunswick, another student charge in British Columbia, and then ministry in Alberta and here in Ontario. And along the way, I have made the acquaintance of thousands of ordinary people of extraordinary faith. Some people like myself who had been born into the United Church, and others who made a conscious decision to become a part of the United Church because it represented for them something that they didn't see in other places. A willingness to take risks, an openness to include all people in spite of their differences, a passion for justice, a solidarity with the poor and the oppressed of this world. On the 75th anniversary of the United Church in 2000, this book, Fire and Grace, Stories of History and Vision, was published to mark that anniversary. In one of the chapters of this book, a minister by the name of Chris Levan, who I actually know quite well, who was then the principal of St. Stephen's Theological College in Edmonton, says that if he had to put the unique gift of the United Church into a few words, they would be hospitable to difference and open to justice. And I think that's actually a pretty good way to be known, something to be proud of and something to celebrate on this anniversary. Hospitable to difference and open to justice. Not a bad legacy to leave to our children and their children all across this country and right here at Arundel United Church. So thanks be to God for the United Church of Canada and for this nurturing community of faith, God's people in this place and for this time. Thanks be to God.